Good morning. It'll just be a minute before we get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week. This is the 49th installment of the weekly virtual office hour address, so we're rapidly closing in on that 1 year mark. People continue to say that they appreciate these weekly live stream addresses, hearing from their mayor, so I continue to do them. This live stream event is really great because it allows me to give you some updates, answer some of your questions, and of course provide some general words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during ever-changing times. I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. These are difficult times for so many of us. The fatigue of staying at home, the semi-good weather, in people wanting to break their bubbles, but we're doing better, and we'll talk about that. And I think that's all because of your hard work. So keep following the county health orders. Do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Don't wash your hand, or don't touch your face. Continue to wash your hands. Reduce the number of people that you come in contact with on a daily basis, and of course, wear your mask. It helps. It's mandatory. You could be a carrier of the virus, or someone you could meet could be a carrier of the virus and be asymptomatic, not showing any symptoms. And so, wearing a mask is your best protection uh, when you're out in public. So definitely, do what you can to stop that spread. We've now reached 340 days after the March 16th county health order put in place the shelter in place, and attempted to slow the spread of COVID-19. So since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot happens almost every day, and I attend daily press conferences, seminars, conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. And we're making progress. So definitely you'll hear more about vaccinations a little bit later. But things are moving along, as far as positive testing, results recently, as well as the vaccination rollout is actually working out a lot better. So let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and of course city level over the last 2 weeks. Um, it was a week ago last Monday. The governor was at Petco. Governor Newsom was at Petco Stadium, and he's basically kicking off his, I'll say, road trip of visiting new vaccination sites that are rolling out. So he spent the week visiting different sites. So Tuesday he was at Levi's Stadium, and it was good to see the county supervisors there. The president of the 49ers, Al Guido, um, basically saying, here's a site that we're opening up right here locally with enough capacity to hopefully vaccinate a lot of the people that are looking to get vaccinated. Last Wednesday, the governor was in Fresno, and talking about a vaccination location that would be opening up in the Central Valley sometime in the next week. And of course, there were calls of their shouts about the recall in the background, but I think this vaccination press tour isn't just about the recall, but it's showing that we're starting to get California, the machinery of getting vaccinations out is starting to work, and so that's really critical. Now, of course, it's getting it having enough vaccines, and so that's a whole other issue, but uh, hopefully we will start seeing more vaccine availability, and definitely there have been a few sites around the state that have closed because they just haven't had enough vaccines. Last Wednesday, Santa Clara County Health announced that there were the first two cases of the South African variant identified in California, and so one was detected here in Santa Clara, one was detected in the Alameda County, and so this was basically saying that yes, these were people that had traveled outside of the U.S., came back, and the good thing was, from Santa Clara standpoint, the person had quarantined, gotten sick, and then been tested and found out that yes, he had been exposed to COVID-19, but the specific variant, the South African variant, which is supposedly more virulent, but ultimately strains now in California as well as other places in the U.S. Last Thursday, so I joined Supervisor Smidian and Supervisor Lee in a town hall, mainly about vaccines, and it was a little bit about COVID-19, but we had representatives from Palo Alto, Palo Alto Medical, Kaiser Medical, Stanford Health, El Camino Health, and of course the county health, which has been doing, I'll say, the mass the most vaccinations are coming through the county right now. And so ultimately, if you need to get vaccinated, you should go to sccfreevax.org. And if you go there, you ultimately get to see, from a positive standpoint, um, a kind of a one-stop shop for all the different healthcare providers and links to where you sign up to set up an appointment at any of those providers. But because keep in mind that because of the county's new open door, no wrong door policy, uh, it's basically anyone who wants to get vaccinated can go to any place. And so the county is, I think, streamlining that process as much as possible. And then as far as the town hall, Supervisor Smithian continues to have town halls with all of his city leaders. So every week for the next few weeks, he'll basically highlight a different city and then bring in those healthcare providers. So if you missed that, if you didn't want to watch the old one, if you have new questions, you can always attend one of the other town halls that Supervisor Smithian is putting in place. As far as this week is concerned, you know, Sunday was Valentine's Day, Monday was President's Day, so things have been fairly quiet as far as this week is concerned. On Tuesday, Governor Newsom was at another vaccination site, this time in LA, and basically talking about trying to make sure that there's equity and making sure that there are enough vaccination sites around around California, especially in those locations that that are underserved. So those underserved communities, and so that's one of the reasons why the county has been focusing on East San Jose, the South Bay, and doing pop-up sites there. So we do have kind of permanent vaccination sites at the fairgrounds, at Levi Stadium, and a lot of different healthcare providers, but they're also doing pop-up sites trying to go into some of these underserved communities where especially some of these senior residents are having trouble getting to a larger vaccination site. So, and we're working on having something of that, within Sunnyvale relatively soon. And so, as far as Governor Newsom's press conference on Tuesday, you know, he was basically saying that the metrics of severity and the spread of COVID-19 are definitely trending downward, and that's been the positive message that we've seen in the last few weeks. We had double-digit statewide positivity rates a month ago, in January, and now that's closer to like 4% today. Hospitalization, ICU admissions are also falling dramatically. The governor, and we'll talk about the county numbers and the city numbers a little bit later, but the governor has said that we've now administered over 6 million vaccines to date, and the supply has been, of course, the largest constraint. We're ramping up to vaccinate 4 million people a week. So that will help us, get closer to getting those vaccines to people that really need it, and getting us closer to opening up as much as possible. And the trend, of course, with that metrics and the way the trends are, the governor thinks that most California counties should be out of the purple tier by this time next month. So, about a month ago, we moved from the regional kind of lockdown to the purple tier, and conceivably we will be moving in from the purple tier into the red tier. And the governor was basically saying that there will probably be even a certain number of counties that will move into the yellow tier within the month. But moving into the red tier gives us a lot more capability and opportunities out there. So restaurants can then open indoors up to 25%. From a state standpoint, retail shops and malls can increase indoor capacity to 50%. Museums, zoos, aquariums can open up to 25% capacity. Gyms and fitness centers at 10% capacity, and of course, movie theaters can open to 25% capacity. So moving into that red tier does reopen a large portion of our economy. But the governor cautioned we are still seeing a lot of variants. I think we have 7 different variants that are now have been seen in California, and so conceivably that does raise a little warning, depending upon what the virulence of each of those strains are, how transmissible they are. But just looking at the overall numbers right now, we are seeing definite positive results as far as that's concerned. And then on Wednesday, Governor Newsom announced the state legislator had reached, the legislators and the governor had reached kind of an agreement on a almost $9.2 billion stimulus package. And so this is, and this is partially, and we talked about it before, the concept of we had a certain amount of money that from a budget surplus, we were going to be applying that to residents and small businesses, but the problem is it would require, of course, the governor and the legislators to figure out what that bill would look like. For residents, it would be conceivably $600 payments to low-income families, and that's about $5.7 million California household, or 5.7 million California households earning less than $30,000, and so that helps a lot of those families that are struggling to pay their rent. a lot of them who've lost their jobs because of COVID. And then for businesses, it was about $2 billion in grants for businesses, nonprofits, and it would be tax cuts for, I think 2 billion in grants, 2 billion in tax cuts for small businesses, and waive license fees for restaurants and bars, and just general fee relief for barbers and cosmetologists, businesses, things of that nature. So ultimately, I think I haven't seen all the details. I know that when I was looking when the first announcement happened, they didn't have all the details out there other than kind of the high ticket numbers, but we'll get more information on that as that actually is released and what the final bill looks like, and ultimately it should get approved and signed as quickly as possible, and checks probably being sent out. I think the governor was estimating as early as March. Okay, and then on Wednesday, and this has been a long time coming, but Santa Clara County health officials announced that workers in education and child care, emergency services, food and agricultural industries will be eligible to get the COVID-19 vaccine beginning Sunday, February 28th. So just about a week from now. And so that will, and to register, go to secfreevax.org. But this is in response to a lot of calls from parents and teachers that in order to get back in the classrooms, teachers definitely need to get vaccinated, and that's the only way we're going to actually be able to open up a large number of our public schools. And so, the Santa Clara County in San Mateo County announced that last week. There were some issues about what they announced because it basically went against what the state was saying. And so, because the state had basically said, we're going to not focus on teachers first, we're going to focus on people who might be have health issues between 16 and 64. But so that was announced from a state standpoint last Friday. But that Friday morning, or last Thursday, San Mateo County said that they're going to start vaccinating teachers. The county, of course, then worked with the state and talked with the other county health and making sure that the state is okay with those changes, because ultimately that's the big thing, that the state has said that if you start not following, not getting the approval from a state standpoint, they're in charge of the distribution of the vaccines. So conceivably you would not be getting the number of vaccines that you ultimately need. So I think that was important, and so they started those discussions last week and finally announced it on Wednesday of this week. So I think that'll be positive. When we start seeing those vaccines roll out to the teachers, we get a lot closer to having a certain percentage of in-person learning. And then, of course, I think it's really critical for all emergency services, for our food and agricultural industry, so restaurants and everyone, to actually get those vaccinations. These are critical industries to make sure that people are safe, students are safe, that the food that we're getting is safe. So I think that's a big step forward as far as that's concerned. And then basically that's kind of it for the week. Let's go ahead and get to the county health dashboard. From a national standpoint, we've had about 27.7 million cases. That's up of only about 500,000 cases since last week, and we've had about 489,000 deaths. So over the next week, we will most likely be passing that 500,000 mark as far as the number of deaths are concerned. So I'm sure that will be, top of the news in the coming week. From California standpoint, we've had 3.4 million cases, and we've had about 48,000 fatalities. So we're doing a little bit better as far as the trends are concerned, and and we're also trending down from a county standpoint. That we've now had over 108,000, but that's only cases, COVID-19 cases, but that's only up about 2,000 from last week. And so week over week, that's down from 3,000, 4,000, 7,000 just about a month ago. So it's actually been very positive that we're starting to see a general drop in those cases, and that's of course reflected in the city numbers also. We've had over 1,700 cases, 1,700 deaths. No, yeah, 1,700 deaths in the last since this began, and that's about 80 new deaths in the last week. So the death count drops. The hospitalizations, we currently only have 266, and that's dropped dramatically from 300, 400, 500, 600 about a month ago. So to me, we've seen kind of a lightening of the issues with COVID. That being said, continue to be safe, continue to be on your guard. Some people are getting the vaccines, and I'm very happy to see a lot of people texting me or commenting on social media that they've gotten their first or second vaccine. Continue to be safe as more and more people, of course, get vaccinated. And from a city number, San Jose, of course, continues to have the most numbers. They surpassed 71,000, but they're only up about 1,200 from last week, and that's 1,200 from the week before, but that's way down from 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 from about a month and a half ago. So they're doing very well. We've only had about 100 new COVID-19 cases in the last week, and so we've had 5,000, and we just went over 5,000 cases since all this began. But that number is way down from 200 a few weeks ago, or 400, 500 about a month and a half ago. So we've seen a steadily decline in new cases in our city also. So, and as far as me, I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf. At the county level, we've had lots of ongoing discussions with county health, county supervisors. From a testing standpoint, the pop-up van, the county van, continues to be at Murphy Park on the second and fourth Monday from 9:30 to 4 p.m. 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And they'll be back again this Monday. So if you haven't reserved your slot, go ahead and you can reserve at sccfreetest.org. And we're looking at continuing to add vaccination sites, and so we'll hopefully have that announced sometime in the next week, working with county health, working with our local healthcare providers. So you should be hearing some news about that relatively soon. And then as far as upcoming events, let me go ahead and announce, there's two big council meetings that still happen next week. So the first is Tuesday night. So we'll be going through several things. We'll do our franchise. We'll be awarding our franchise with the collection of our solid waste, recyclables, and organic materials. And that'll that's the ongoing negotiations with specialty waste, solid waste, about collection of our trash. And also there'll be Tuesday night we'll go through a redistricting ordinance. So this will be we've talked about how we redistrict our districts based upon the new census data, and we had a longer discussion a few weeks ago at council, talking about what that redistricting process would look like, and this would put that ordinance into place to deal with that census data. And it's a mixture of things from that standpoint of having a 7-person commission plus 3 alternates. It would be coming up with 3 to 5 maps with a preferred map, and then bringing that to council, and council choosing one of those maps. And so there's a lot of public outreach that would be part of this, but this ordinance is defining what that ultimately looks like. And that was just released, the draft ordinance, and some of those reports were just released yesterday. And then one of the positive things that we're finally doing is authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with our city forest. And so that's a nonprofit that we've been trying to work with, and a lot of the issues were around COVID and making sure that we could actually do what we were hoping to do. But this is approving planting trees on homeowners' property, and so it's a minor budget change, but ultimately what this will do is allow more trees to be planted within Sunnyvale. So it's a nonprofit that comes out, plants trees if a homeowner is willing to sponsor that tree. So I think it's similar to some degree. It's similar to the bike rack program that we talked about previously. So that bike rack program was for small businesses that wanted to install a bike rack in front of their location. And there's a lot of older shopping centers around Sunnyvale which don't have bike racks. And so if you're a biker and you go there, you end up having to chain or lock your bike to some pole wherever you can find it. This is basically a city-sponsored bike rack program where businesses can request it. If the property owner, landlord of that business allows it, then the city will come in and install a bike rack. But then, of course, it's up to that landlord, up to that property owner to maintain that. And so it's trying to make it a lot easier for people that are biking to use that active transportation, to feel a little bit safer about biking around the city and leaving their bike at the business locked up while they go inside. So I think that's been positive. But so that that kind of our city forest program will be doing something similar with trees. So basically, as long as the homeowner is going to sponsor watering that tree and making sure that it survives, it's putting more trees and and basically increasing our urban forest as much as possible, which is positive from a global warming standpoint, and it's just better from a city standpoint. And then, of course, next Thursday, February 25th, is another all-day meeting. So this is starting at 8:30 in the morning, and we'll be talking about study issues and budget issues. So it's our workshop. So it's our second of 3 all-day meetings. So our first one, of course, was last month, was our strategic session to talk about ultimately what our priorities are from a council standpoint for the next year. Our second all-day workshop is on our study issues and our budget issues. And so we're going to basically rank and discuss the 30 study issues that have been proposed throughout the year, and then figure out, whether or not where those come back to us during our and kind of we rank them and figure out then what can be funded based upon funding and city staff, and figure out where they stand from a budget standpoint. So that will be the next meeting that we have, I think in May. So something at that time. So it's a month or two before we get to that. And then, of course, upcoming on Tuesday, March 2nd, starting at 4 p.m. will be the third of our Moffett Park specific plan outreach meetings. And so these are kind of an expanded study session. So it starts at 4 p.m. with a staff and consultant presentation. It then goes on to public comment. And then finally, we wrap up with a council study session where council is giving feedback, asking questions on the topic of the day. And so the third Moffett Park specific plan meeting will be on the market condition, land use, housing, and open space. And so, if you want more information, you can always go to moffatparksp.com, and you can get, basically information on the upcoming meeting, as well as the links to the old videos, as well as questions and presentations from the last two presentations. So this is I think it's really been a positive outreach process, because people have gotten to ask questions either verbally or online, and then even rank some of those questions and get some of those answers. So I think it's been very positive from that standpoint. Let's go ahead and get to our questions. I've got a meeting coming up, so we're trying to move a little bit fast this week. Mirabelle asked, does the new education-based vaccination announcement apply to nannies? And so, this kind of goes back to what the state requires and kind of the state definitions of vaccinations. And the state language is pretty expansive. They said that all formal and informal child care workers, including daycare providers, would fall under that educational umbrella when vaccinations happen. So I checked with the county. They're checking with the state just to be sure, but definitely, at least how I read it, that falls under that same umbrella. And I think that's because the state has tried to make it not be too restrictive, and especially as they moved on to education, and what education entails is different for different people. And so as far as I see it, the county's trying to get clarification so that they can be very clear when they start allowing educational workers to get vaccinated, but that will hopefully happen sometime soon. The county and the state are in constant communication. Sometimes they don't get the questions answered as quickly as they might hope, but that being said, it has been moving on to this next stage of vaccinations. I do think that there'll be a lot of people that'll be happy that the people that are interfacing with their children are getting vaccinated. So I think that'll be fairly positive. Brooke asked, and so this was from last week. Brooke asked, will mass vaccination site open in Santa Clara County, or are there plans for pop-up or mobile sites? So that was the big thing last week, that we had the Levi Stadium vaccination site open up, and they are currently vaccinating up to 5,000 people a day. And there's lots of small vaccination sites around this county. CVS, which was going to do vaccinations, even CVS and Rite Aid, and so this is kind of different. So some things come through the state and go then to the county, or go on to certain healthcare providers. Some of them go straight from the federal government. So CVS and Rite Aid are also allowed to do vaccinations. And so the CVS, although it was supposed to be the Sunnyvale CVS, currently they're not listed there, but Mountain View, Santa Clara CVS are listed there. But you can go there and sign up for an appointment, but they're only getting about 100 shots a day from a federal allocation standpoint. So 100 shots every 7 days. And then Rite Aid, that will also be administering vaccinations, they're only getting about 20 shots a day, so 20 vaccinations a day. So it varies from site to site. We'll definitely be having some vaccination sites, at least a vaccination site in Sunnyvale in the upcoming weeks. And so that we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to go out and get vaccinated. So that should be fairly positive. There's still questions about how My Turn integrates into the total kind of health. So My Turn is the state mandated system for signing up and then getting informed when it's your turn to get vaccinated, and kind of also being a portal into getting vaccinations. That being said, it doesn't directly link to to what this county is doing right now. So, from our standpoint, I know it's being rolled out more in Southern California, but our counties are doing a very good job about getting people vaccinated. For one thing, they've already managed it through the testing sites. Now they're doing the same thing with the vaccination. So, you know, definitely, I think it's a positive. It's positive that so many sites are becoming available, and that rollout. It's now the biggest barrier to getting people vaccinated, of course, is ultimately the number of vaccines out there. So, and that's being focused. That's a main focus from a federal standpoint, and hopefully that will that'll clear up the backlog of people that want to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. And so, um, from a state standpoint, from a county standpoint, we're trying to follow those the state guidelines, but ultimately, we'll hopefully roll that out as quickly as possible. And move to healthcare workers, move to and all the healthcare workers, and then moving on to people that are immunocompromised, have health conditions, cancer, chronic kidney disease, all the basically people that are at risk from at lower ages. But right now we still don't have the people that are over 65 vaccinated. So we're close. I think we the good thing is last week we surpassed, or I think last weekend we surpassed about 50% of those residents over 65 in the county have now been vaccinated. That being said, we're not at 100%. So, and those are some of the people that are most at risk if they have health issues, and they contract COVID. Those are the most people that are at risk of being hospitalized, and I think so that's important to make sure that those people are vaccinated as quickly as possible. Several people ask what's happening at Fair Oaks Park with the unhoused, and so ultimately, we're finalizing those contracts. There should be a wider release of information either today or beginning of next week. So that's very positive. It's like I spend a lot of time on this issues. I've been working with County Supervisor Lee and his office on other possibilities, whether or not that's tiny homes. Trying to get county health to provide more support, and county health has been inundated with the issues of COVID-19, and so they haven't been able to keep up with all the problems. Because of COVID, we've had to reduce the number of people at the shelter, and that might have been one of the easiest solutions. But at the Hamlin shelter here in Sunnyvale, after advocacy a few years ago, they moved the number of beds from 125 to 175. Now, of course, they only have about 80 people staying there, and there's singles, couples, families staying there. I do think that adding tiny homes at that site would actually be very positive, because then some of the families could have real privacy. So I think that will be would be a positive solution. But that being said, it takes time to get homes there. There were several that were opened, several tiny homes that were opened in San Jose earlier this week. It was a county project, and so it was positive to see that happening. But it's making sure that from a city standpoint, and from those that unhoused at Fair Oaks Park, making sure that they're housed, but also providing the appropriate services, health care, making sure that they're getting health looked at, and of course the food, they're making sure that their possessions are processed and stored, all those things that are critical to make sure that it's not just what we see that's been happening in San Jose over and over again, of sweeping the homeless out of their park. So we'll hopefully, we'll have that announcement sometime in the next week or so. And so that's been, I think it's been a big effort. I have another phone call later this morning, so we'll try to move this along. But it's been a lot of advocacy, a lot of meeting of the minds to try to get to make sure that we can find the people that provide the necessary services that that these people need. That the unhoused, and this is the whole thing. We've been working to renovate Fair Oaks Park, but we're not just going to sweep those residents away. So, and then of course, let's see. George asked, what's happening with the downtown, and so we've seen, if you've been downtown, the post office site, the old post office was torn down over the last week. So the apartments next door and that post office site was torn down. Ultimately, that will become an office building with kind of retail on the bottom, kind of an open area at the bottom, right next to kind of connecting to Plaza del Sol. And then, of course, the parking lot next to Murphy Square, that will also be a new office building, but it'll kind of match the architecture, at least from what I've seen from early designs, match the architecture of Murphy Square. So that's an interesting thing, and I haven't seen that final design, but we'll see that slowly move forward over the next few months. Let's see if I have any other questions. Okay. Vanessa asked, or let's see. No. Oh, Molly asked, and this has been the ongoing question of one question on everyone's mind during these trying times is when Dunkin' Donuts is opening. So unofficially, they are supposed to open this weekend. So we will have a Dunkin' in Sunnyvale sometime soon. It's already been, the interior's been done. I've been by on my morning run. I didn't go by this morning to see if they might do a soft opening a little bit earlier. A lot of places do soft openings before they officially open, but people have been asking on and off for some time now, and finally it looks like that will happen this weekend. So if you get a chance to visit them, they're on El Camino, right near Maria, right near Wolf Road. So right across from that Safeway. So yeah, if you get a chance, drop by, take a look. I'm sure it's good to have new businesses opening up in Sunnyvale. There's several new businesses that are right on the cusp of opening. So you'll be hearing a lot more in the next month or so about new businesses that have cropped up. Something, a new tea place, boba tea, opened up in that same Safeway shopping center on El Camino, right there at Maria near Wolf Road, just last weekend. So we are starting to see, I think businesses see that things are getting better, that the climate for opening up new businesses is there, and so I think you'll see a lot more of that in the next month or two. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up. I know that from a morning standpoint, I try to keep these shorter. There's not a lot of new news. There's always things happening, but if you have questions, definitely email me. Thanks for joining me again this week. As always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response during the pandemic. Life continues to be difficult. New issues come up, but your actions, your response really do make a difference. Continue to wear your mask, continue to build community and help others, especially during these times. I'm really proud to see Sunnyvale pulling together to help those in need. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello. Of course, from a safe social distance, people miss that social interaction. There's a big issue of mental health, and getting outside of your home is really important. But Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We will get through this together. Thanks for listening. And until next week, wear your mask, take care, stay safe, and take care of yourself. Okay, goodbye.